Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis, and during my travels in Africa I had the great privilege of interviewing Mr. Damen Leff, whose South African Pagan Rights Alliance and ongoing advocacy against witch hunts I have long admired and applauded. I'm sure that you will enjoy the interview.
Hi, my name's Damen Leff. I'm the director of the South African Pagan Rights Alliance. The South African Pagan Rights Alliance was formed in 2004 as a human rights activist alliance. We don't focus on the teaching of religion. We focus exclusively on the advocacy of human rights issues around paganism and alternative minority faiths. Well, there are quite a few things that we've done that we're very happy with. Our largest advocacy movement surrounds the witch hunt issue in South Africa. We run an annual campaign since 2008 called the 30 Days of Advocacy Against Witch Hunts. Of course, the campaign itself is a year-long campaign in which we try to highlight the incidences of witch hunts in South Africa. They're often very brutal and very violent. They affect largely older women, but younger women are also targeted, falsely accused of being witches. It's very important to stress here that the victims of witch hunts are not witches. They do not identify as witches. They belong predominantly to black population groups, and their accusers are members of their own family, members of their own villages. The accusations are usually baseless, usually confirmed by traditional healers through the throwing of bones. The victims are not afforded any kind of legal assistance. They are not tried in a court of law. Those who are tried in courts are tried in traditional courts, where prejudice and bias against witchcraft is very evident. Again, the victims who are tried in such courts are not given legal advice, legal assistance, and they don't have access to legal courts after the fact. In cases where people who've been accused of witchcraft are not murdered and end up in traditional courts, the punishment could actually be worse. In the cases that we've studied, victims who are found guilty by traditional courts of practicing witchcraft without any actual evidence being provided other than a divinatory reading by a traditional healer. These people are forcibly removed from their homes and their communities, very often with their entire families, because in traditional African societies, an accusation of witchcraft is does not just affect the person being accused; it affects the entire family who carry the name. There's a belief in African traditional religions that witchcraft is born from the breast, which means that it comes from the mother and is passed down to daughters and sons in a family. And so an accusation against any member of a family automatically makes people suspicious of the entire family. And we have many horrific stories of families being forcibly removed from their communities and homes, their homes being burned, the lucky ones escaping death, and being forced into refugee camps in Limpopo province. South Africa currently has 4 refugee camps in Limpopo province. One was formed in the 1980s when we had a lot of violence before our first democratic elections, and 3 of them have been growing steadily since then. Last year we had a representative of the CRL Rights Commission. The CRL Rights Commission is the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities, attending one of these villages in order to begin to hear their stories. And the lady who was there representing the CRL Rights Commission called me and said, "Damen, people are still arriving who have just been tried in traditional courts. So this is an ongoing problem." SAPRA believes seriously that this is a human rights issue and that South Africa faces a human rights refugee crisis because of accusations of witchcraft. Unfortunately, our government will not admit to this. Our own Human Rights Commission refuses to deal with the subject, even though we've raised it with them every year since 2007-8. And they have, in so many words, told us that this is not a human rights issue, this is a religious rights issue. Well, it doesn't affect people who hold witchcraft as their religion, so it's not a religious rights issue. It is a human rights issue. The United Nations itself has identified witch hunts globally as a human rights issue. They've prepared papers and published them on the refugee crisis surrounding this particular human rights issue. So I think it's about time that our own Human Rights Commission and the South African government face the facts and acknowledge that this is a serious problem, one that they are not dealing with. Toko Mkhwanazi, the lady I spoke about earlier, said that the first refugee village, which was started in the 1980s, is actually now a small town. It has its own school. It has its own community centres. So it has steadily grown into a little town. The other three, I can't give you an accurate figure of the number of people in there because she was unable to determine that. The other three villages are not yet towns. They are still informal settlements, if you'd like to call them that. They don't have any services from government. They're not getting any kind of legal assistance. There are no schools, no police accessible in the immediate area. So their human rights are not being protected or promoted at all. I think it has always been a problem. I don't think that we can say that it's growing worse or that it's becoming less of a problem. I think from what we can identify as witch hunts have always been sporadic. They will occur in some months, 7 or 8 incidents in some months, and then you'll go through 3 or 4 months without hearing any incidents being reported. Keep in mind that of those incidents reported, only a fraction are covered by the media. Most of those incidents are never recorded by the media, especially not when victims of accusation appear in traditional courts. Media is not allowed, and nobody reports on those cases. So it has been a continuous problem. The prejudice against witchcraft, the bias that most people have in this country against witchcraft is so overwhelmingly powerful for many people that witchcraft is used as an excuse for a common misfortune. Someone may have an accident and their family members may immediately accuse their neighbor of bewitching them. The reasons for witch hunts are numerous, and unfortunately they still occur far too frequently. When we see the media not covering incidents of witch hunts for a couple of months, we question, are no witch hunts occurring, or is the media simply not paying attention to them? Because we believe they continuously occur. What we're seeing is only a very small fraction.
So this would basically be a problem that most people here don't care about.
I would say that that's true. South Africa is an incredibly violent country. We are told that 1 in 4 women have experienced or will experience rape in their life. People are murdered every single day in this country for all kinds of reasons. So I suppose the authorities are looking at, if they are looking at witch hunts and saying, well, this is just another form of crime. And possibly in relation to the amount of crime that black lesbians are experiencing in their towns, probably not a priority. Certainly not a priority for human rights activists in this country. It's shocking that the South African Pagan Rights Alliance is the only non-governmental organization advocating for an end to witch hunts. That the issue has not been picked up by far more experienced and wealthier other NGOs who have a longer track record in dealing with human rights issues, that they simply will not deal with the issue. So part of that is the overwhelming institutional bias in this country against the subject of witchcraft. Nobody wants to touch it. Our own politicians don't want to touch it, and I suppose for very good reason. Because during the 80s, politicians who came out against witch hunts were accused of protecting witches, even though there were no witches involved in the witch hunts themselves. And I suppose politicians now are afraid of committing political suicide on a political platform by publicly denouncing accusations of witchcraft and witch hunts, for fear of themselves being accused again of protecting witches. Unfortunately for them, the Bill of Rights guarantees freedom of belief and religion. Religions like paganism, Satanism, and occultism are legal under our Constitution. And witchcraft is certainly legal under our Constitution. We have a visible religious minority in this country already who identify witchcraft as their religion. Several organizations who identify as witchcraft organizations are designated with Home Affairs, and that means that we can appoint our own religious pagan marriage officers. So the idea that a politician would not speak for the principles of the Bill of Rights is concerning for me, irrespective of the issue, witch hunts, violence against lesbians, that doesn't matter. fact is there is a human rights abuse occurring, and it contradicts both the spirit and letter of the South African Constitution.
Now, so far we've been talking about witch hunts in mostly the black community. What do you think is the likelihood that this could jump the fence, so to speak? Is that a real concern?
Well, I think for me and for SAPRA, it is a real concern, and we've been treating it as a real concern. We've been accused as a result of fear-mongering, of promoting fear and panic in the community. But we don't believe that we are doing that. We believe that what we are doing is addressing an existing fear and panic, predominantly amongst evangelical Christians, who have for many years been promoting anti-witchcraft, anti-satanic, anti-occult propaganda, essentially. At the root of this problem, and I need to explain the background to this in order for you to understand why I say there is a very real threat against real witches and real pagans in this country. Because the background to this is that since the 1980s, 1990s, we've had in existence an occult crime unit, staffed largely by evangelical Christians who firmly believe that most, if not all, non-Christian religions are satanic in some form or another. In fact, in many published statements by former and current leaders of said unit, witchcraft has been identified as, if not equal or akin to satanic abuse. It has been identified as a gateway to the darker, dangerous practices of Satanism. The unit has never, in its entire history of existence, proven that satanic crimes occur in South Africa with such alarming regularity that we need a special police force in order to deal with them. In fact, we have more Christians in this country committing crimes every year than we have ever seen occultists of any kind committing crimes. So the very idea that we have an occult crime unit and not a Christian crime unit should be cause for concern. More importantly, the new members being trained, detectives being trained for the occult crime unit, are being trained by former units members who each of them have formed their own warfare, Christian warfare ministries, targeted specifically at witchcraft, occultism, Satanism, and paganism. It's just a matter of time before they overstep the boundaries that they're attempting to blur at the moment. We see the first sign of their influence in South African politics with the statements made by MEC Creasy, the MEC for the Department of Education in Gauteng, a month ago, where she announced that the department had formed an interfaith working group with Muslims, Christians, and members of the traditional African religions to target religious crimes in schools, something that they called harmful religious practices in public schools. When a member of the press asked the MEC Creasy what harmful religious practices she was talking about, she specifically said Satanism and occultism. Well, if you understand anything about occultism, you'll understand that pagans, irrespective of who we are, draw on the history, the medieval and Middle Age history of occultism. That essentially our religions are rooted in occult philosophy. And that a statement on a public platform that targets occultists or occultism does impact on us. We can imagine already that we have 3 cases, provable cases, where Christian children, as a result of the satanic panic being promoted by the ORC unit and the ex-members of the ORC and now members of the Department of Education, have already been falsely accused of being Satanists in school and expelled. They're now sitting at home. They don't have access to justice because nobody believes that they're not Satanists, and because their parents are not supportive of them, because their parents are ashamed of the accusations that they've been exposed to. But essentially their human rights have been trampled on. We have a national policy on religion and education in South Africa, which states very clearly that if religion is to be taught in any public school, it has to be taught in a non-partisan way. That means that no education official or teacher or principal may target any existing religion by saying that said religion is harmful and may not be dealt with or practiced in our school. In fact, the Bill of Rights, states that everybody is entitled to freedom of belief in religion, and insofar as children and pupils are concerned, any pupil may choose any religion of their choice. And our advice to children generally, but specifically to pagan children, is educate yourself on what the law says around freedom of religion. And if your school targets you as a result of this satanic panic, if your school targets you as being a Satanist or accuses you of practicing harmful religious practices, find yourself an attorney. But very, very clearly, state very clearly to your principal and your educators that the law allows you to believe whatever you choose, to practice any religion you choose, and that nobody has the right to prejudice you or discriminate against you as a result of that. So if it's already happening to Christian children, it's just a matter of time before some poor child who is interested in astrology or reading tarot cards or is listening to alternative music, goth music, happens to like wearing black, has a weird hairstyle or is wearing an earring, is going to be targeted by prejudicial teachers and principals and falsely accused of harmful religious practices. Religious practices which, by the way, the Department of Education fails to understand completely. They don't know what Satanism is. They don't know what occultism is. So the South African Pagan Rights has lodged complaints of hate crime, hate speech against the MEC for Gauteng, KZN, and the Western Cape Education Department, because we believe that their statements on a public platform constitute hate speech in terms of the Equality Act.
So far we've been talking about South Africa, but this is not only a problem in South Africa, and you've been very involved in publicizing the problem of witch hunts in other parts of the world. So could you speak a little bit to that?
Well, witch hunts occur in almost every African country, and recently everybody probably saw the Papua New Guinea incident where a woman was set alight on a bonfire. It made headline news everywhere in the world. But incidents like that happen in Africa every single day. In South Africa, probably every second or third day. But witch hunts occur everywhere in the world. And the most recent case you might remember in the UK, where a child from Africa was falsely accused of being a witch, tortured by his guardians and murdered. There have been other cases in Europe as well. So it is a global issue. It's not rooted to primitive societies in Africa. Witch hunts can occur everywhere. They can occur in Middle America. They can occur anywhere where prejudice lives.
We want to talk a little bit about South Africa as in terms of now versus the past, and how things have changed and how they are changing. And what would you say?
Well, obviously, having the Bill of Rights has enabled minority groups to gain not only recognition but protection under the law. We have excellent legislation protecting the right to religion, but also the right to sexual orientation. We have the rights to get married. We have a Civil Union Act, which indirectly enables pagans to appoint pagan marriage officers. So several organizations have designation with the Department of Home Affairs and have already appointed pagan marriage officers, many of whom are actually self-identified as witches. So in that sense, we've been blessed, we've been fortunate. In terms of gay rights, when the Civil Union Bill was being discussed in Parliament, approximately 80% of the country oppose the gay marriage and oppose the Civil Union Act. But Parliament pushed it through on principle, so we're blessed for that. Of course, we had a very active gay rights advocacy movement amongst largely white gay and lesbians, transsexuals, but it didn't really impact as much on African communities. We're still very divided in our country as a result of our history. And we still see far too many hate crimes against particularly black lesbians in black communities. Even though they have rights, as you said earlier, rights need to be claimed. Unfortunately for black lesbians, the ability to claim rights from an aggressive patriarchal male society that would rather see them burn than live in peace is very difficult. I see a lot of movement amongst black activists now around the issues of gender violence and alternative sexuality. So that's a good thing. I think things may change. In general, I think that South Africans are attempting to get on with each other. I can't say the same for our politicians. I think our politicians have done more to divide our country along racial lines in the last 10 years than ordinary South Africans have done. We see constant conflict between opposing political parties who have used race as a card to object to issues. I think the time has come for us to put race aside, to deal with the past. Let's not forget that it actually happened. Let's not forget that we're dealing with an unfortunate heritage which we are still trying to sort. But we don't need politicians to make things worse by using race rhetoric on public platforms. In fact, politicians have also used rhetoric against witchcraft on public platforms. I remember when Cope broke away from the ANC and formed a new party, ANC politicians used public political platforms to accuse members of Cope of being witches, which immediately sparked fresh witch hunts in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. So I don't think our politicians have been very helpful. But we have the will to move forward and to survive as a people with a common history and a common identity. I think there's hope there.
Let's talk a little bit about you yourself, because we've talked about all of the different causes and all of the different politics. What is life like for you? What makes you tick?
Well, I suppose I'm an activist at heart. It's, for me, the principle is far more important than anything else. If you can't stand for something, you are going to fall for everything. And for me, there are certain principles which govern my life, which have always governed my life. I'm blessed to be able to live on a piece of property where I could grow my own vegetables, keep my chickens, have an orchard, become self-sufficient. And I've always promoted the idea that people are only poor or unemployed because they don't have access to be able to grow their own food, to be able to take care of themselves. It doesn't take much for people to be able to become self-sufficient. And I think if more of us became self-sufficient in such a way that we could share our excess with our neighbors, we would have far less poverty, we would have far less hunger. Apart from my activism in those areas, I earn a living as a potter. I run a pottery called Minerva Pottery. The influences for my pottery are partly activism, partly religion. And my love for the earth, for nature, is my prime inspiration. Most of my pieces are inspired by elements of the environment around me. I also am, at the moment, the editor-in-chief for Penton Independent Pagan magazine, which was started in 1995, in fact, before the Pagan Federation of South Africa was formed. Our new editor, Bronwyn Katska, wonderful woman, is going to take Penton into the future as an independent pagan media. We're about to start Penton Internet Radio on Blog Talk Radio. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to interviewing people I've always wanted to talk to internationally. I have a deep curiosity about people and what makes them tick and what motivates them to do the things that they do. And I think that they have really interesting stories that they can share with South African pagans who are looking for inspiration. What else can I tell you about myself? Well, I am a witch, by definition. I prefer to identify myself... I am a pagan, obviously, but I prefer to identify myself as a pantheist animist, which essentially means that I worship the earth as god, goddess. I'm not a theist in that sense that I believe in independent gods and goddesses, although I recognize that they exist within ancient mythologies, but I see them personally as manifestations of the natural world around me. Zeus for me isn't some god with a thunderbolt, but is the actual lightning. And so if I want to commune with the lightning, I may use the term Zeus, or I may use the African term Shanku. But for me, I'm communicating with a raw force of nature. An animist because I believe that everything in nature is invested with its own spirit and soul and essence. And I think that's the core of my religious belief system. And it impacts everything else in my life, because there is nothing on the planet that is not a part or permeated by the spirits that we live in.
Now, if people wanted to learn more about you, or more about the different organizations we've talked about, or if they wanted to buy your pottery, where would they go?
Well, I am on Facebook. Look for Damen Leff. You can contact the South African Pagan Rights Alliance by going to www.paganrightsalliance.org. You will also find a link on that website to our 30-day advocacy campaign, Advocacy Against Witch Hunts. You can find Penton, Independent Pagan Media, at www.penton.co.za. All of those are also represented on Facebook, so have a look for Penton on Facebook, or SAPRA, or South African Pagan Rights Alliance, on Facebook. And I have a page for my pottery called Minerva Pottery, also on Facebook, MNRVA in capital letters, Minerva in honor of the ancient Roman goddess Minerva. I welcome commissions. I'm willing to make anything for you and send it anywhere in the world.
Very good. Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't touched on?
Well, I would like to thank you and for promoting the Advocacy Against Witch Hunts. I know from the very first time we began the advocacy in 2008, you spoke for the advocacy, and I know that every year you have covered the advocacy in one way or another, so I am really appreciative of that. I'd like to thank all the support of the advocacy internationally. We appreciate your support, because without willing voices and without willing hands, the advocacy would be nothing but an idea. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed that interview and that you'll join us for many more features here on Magic TV. And until next time, may you blessed be.